CanHack is an amazing cybersecurity competition. Basically, what we're going to be doing is playing something called a CTF. Does anyone know what a CTF or a capture the flag is? I know some of you played through it last year. Anyone who would be willing to explain to everyone else what they think it is? By a show of hands, or willing to talk to the rest of the group? OK, so a CTF, or a capture the flag, is a capture the flag game in the context of cybersecurity, is essentially a series of challenges that you'll play through, with the idea being that you're either going to be learning a ton of new skills that'll be extremely relevant to you in industry, or you're going to be honing those skills. And so CTFs kind of range in difficulty all the way from someone who has no exposure to programming will be able to sort of complete the ones that some of the earlier challenges, like the ones we'll cover with CanHack and Pico CTF, all the way up to industry veterans who will regularly play CTFs in order to stay up to date, to hone their skills, and make sure they're at the top of their field. So the way CanHack works is like this. Instead of reinventing the wheel, we're going to be using an existing CTF platform called Pico CTF. So Pico CTF is an amazing platform that was built by Carnegie Mellon University out in the US. And they've been running their CTF platform for a few years. So the thing they've done to try and incentivize as many students to play through the game as possible is they actually offer a ton of cash prizes to all of the middle and high school students based out of the US that are competing over the course of the 2 weeks that Pico CTF is actually live. And while that is amazing, that meant that all of you actually playing through the game, as much as you would have had the incentive to learn and try new things, you wouldn't have had that same financial incentive, those like a few $1,000s in prizes, to be able to say, you know what, I got stuck on a problem, I don't know how I'm going to push through. You don't exactly have, a bunch of cash on the other side of that wall that you're looking forward to. So what we decided to do with the generous sponsorship of RBC is we decided to put together a platform that sits on top of Pico CTF that we called CanHack that allows every Canadian high school student to be eligible for a bunch of prizes as well. But then also, even beyond those prizes, we realized that we wanted to make sure we were making it as easy as possible for you guys to get started with these challenges. So we've also put together an absolutely rock star team of mentors from currently working in industry from RBC, TPS, and CSE. And so those industry mentors will actually be there to help you through any of the challenges you're facing. And the way you're going to actually interact with them, the way all of those interactions will be facilitated, is through a platform called Piazza. So we're going to cover how to actually use Piazza. We'll make sure that all of you get onto that platform if you aren't already by the end of today. And so Piazza is going to be one of the key tools that you interact with all the mentors through. But also on top of that, in the afternoon portion of today, we're also going to play through the game. And in sort of a one-on-one setting, we're going to have a few mentors, and I'm also going to be around, and we'll try and help you through any challenges you're currently facing. So it doesn't matter if you're on like the first level or if you're on somewhere past like the first 50 challenges. We'll be able to help you with whatever it is you're currently working on. In terms of the actual logistics of the game itself, there are 5 sort of key tracks in terms of the kinds of questions that will be asked of you. So there are questions in computer forensics, cryptography, web security, reversing, and binary exploits. And so if you're new to programming, or if you really don't have any sort of exposure to cybersecurity, what you can choose to do is sort of be more of a generalist, try all the different problems that are available to you, especially because the assumption with CanHack and Pico CTF is that you have 0 experience going into it. And so you can choose to be a generalist, but if you've got experience, or you begin to realize that even after playing through some of these challenges that you have an affinity for one type of challenge, you can choose to hyper-specialize and exclusively filter by all of the challenges in a specific track or two. So that's how you would play through CanHack and Pico CTF. So what's sort of like the goal of CanHack? The goal is essentially to get as many of you on the platform learning things and just kind of getting exposure to cybersecurity and information security as a field in general. The more students, the more people we have with exposure to these skills, we think the better off our entire country is going to be. And so really it is sort of a long-term play. It's absolutely about that vision. And of course, the short term here is how is this totally relevant for you? There are a lot of really amazing jobs that pay extremely well in this industry. And the demand for talent is completely outpacing the supply. That's actually absolutely a huge reason why we've had such amazing sponsorship from all the people that we're working with and partnering with on this platform, because they want to have you guys working with them as you actually begin to go to university, and for some of you, even while you're still in high school. So you may even have a chance to potentially intern with some of these companies that we're working with if this ends up being something you're interested in and you actually do very well in CanHack itself. So that's why we sort of built CanHack. That's how it operates. We're gonna talk about how to actually use Piazza. So we're gonna jump over to that for a second. After that, we're gonna talk about how to use a terminal, what exactly it is. We'll walk through 5 or 6 sort of basic commands. So we won't focus too much on theory. We'll just be like, how do I immediately start using this? How do I become sort of productive in a terminal? And then after that, we'll play through maybe 2 or 3 sort of quick challenges in this year's game, actually, just to make sure you guys are all on the platform, you know what to expect, and you can sort of build that early momentum. So we'll quickly pause here. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, if any of you have laptops that you haven't already taken out, can you take them out now? And I'm going to put up a URL on the board. And just navigate to that URL. I'm going to take a pause. I'm going to walk around. If there's anyone struggling to get on the Wi-Fi network or struggling to get to that URL, just raise your hand. Otherwise, I'll be making the rounds and just making sure everyone's on the same page before we continue. If you go to that link, you should see this. So it's going to ask you to actually join Piazza as a student. So if you go ahead and just click the radio button that says student, fairly straightforward, and hit join classes. It's now going to prompt you for your email address. So the reason why this is going to be relevant is actually 2 things. One is it's going to send you a verification code, so actually use an email address that is legitimate that you have access to. And the other is that Piazza will actually email you in real time if you choose to opt into it with updates anytime your question has actually been answered. And so if you're going to be posting, if you want instructors to help you out and you want to know immediately as soon as your question's been answered, because you're struggling with something, and this is a bit of like a time crunch in terms of how the game is played, it probably would be a good idea to make this email your primary email that you choose to sign up with. I am going to be a bit of a hypocrite. I am going to use a throwaway email only because I've already signed onto the platform in a completely separate one, and I want to be able to follow along the sign-up process just with you guys. So I'm going to copy this totally legitimate and real email, enter it twice, so just email, confirm email, and then hit submit. And so now it's going to prompt you for a verification code, much like any time you sign up for any other platform. So you can either choose to copy and paste the verification code, or also within the email, it'll send you a link, which is a deep link. So if you click it, it'll take you to the next part of the sign-up screen, or the registration process. You need to double check your spam folder, because for whatever reason, Piazza emails still sort of get filtered into spam for a very high percentage of the time. I'll keep reloading or refreshing this mailbox, and you'll see what the email looks like, just so you can kind of keep an eye out for it if you haven't already gotten it. And again, I'm going to walk around now again with Haseeb. If anyone still struggling to just even get to this URL or is having issues connecting to the Wi-Fi, let me know. Otherwise, we're all just going to take a second here, take a couple minutes, just wait for everyone to get the email, make sure we're all on the platform. Also, for anyone who actually did use Piazza last year, you can actually just choose to log in. You don't need to make a completely new account. That's good. OK, so because it seems that Piazza may have sort of wised up to the tactics I'm using with throwaway emails, and they're not a huge fan of them anymore, and because it seems everyone else has gotten their verification code already, I'm just going to talk through what you need to do without it being directly on the screen. So it's now going to prompt you to enter some basic information. So it's going to ask you for your full name, and then it'll ask you to create a password and then confirm your password. And then immediately below it, it asks you if you're pursuing a degree. So for context, Piazza is primarily used by post-secondary institutions, so that's colleges and universities. This isn't relevant to you guys at all. And so if you just kind of scroll right below it, you'll see a check mark or a box that says that I'm not pursuing a degree or something along those lines. So if you actually check that box, it'll allow you to completely skip that portion, so you don't need to enter any information about whatever degree you're pursuing, because obviously that's not relevant. And then immediately below that, you accept the terms and conditions, and then you should be able to hit submit. That seems pretty straightforward. But if you go on to the last screen of the sign-up process, you're going to be asked one more question. And again, it is sort of intended for post-secondary students. So it's going to ask you if you want to join their network. Totally up to you. But if you want to just skip through it, I would just advise that you click Do Not Join Network. I think the exact verbiage is, do not join or don't join the network. And then once you're done that, that'll allow you to skip through the rest of it. That's the end of the registration process. And you should all be greeted with a screen that has a very sort of dim gray overlay, sort of pointing out how to use Piazza or some of the more relevant sections. I'm going to just check one more time to see if I can get an email and continue through and show you. Wonderful. So I'll just talk through it one more time just to make sure if anyone's lagging behind. Full name and password. So I'm going to just enter Hussein. Going to pick a password. And this is the checkbox I'm talking about. It says I'm not pursuing a degree. If you select that box right at the bottom, if you select that box, you'll realize or notice that the other options have been grayed out, so you don't need to actually enter anything other than your name and password. Accept the terms and conditions, which is the checkbox right below it, and then hit continue. This is the last screen of the sign-up process, the part I was talking about, either choosing to join the network or not join the network. And I'm advising that you choose to click Don't Join the Network. And then you'll be greeted with this screen where you have this dim gray overlay pointing out some important parts of how Piazza as a platform actually functions. So I'll take one more second here. Just make sure everyone's actually managed to get through the flow and is currently logged into the platform, and then we can quickly discuss how to actually use it. So while we're just waiting, I will add that there are mobile apps for both iOS and Android. So if you'd prefer to interact with the platform through either iOS or Android, like your actual phone instead of your desktop, it's totally up to you. But generally, I'd probably, again, advise towards using the desktop platform, only because you're going to be reading through a lot of content, linking through a bunch of things. And most likely, if you're actually using Piazza, you're playing through the game, which is going to be kind of difficult on your phone. OK. So now that everyone's signed into the platform and currently on Piazza, there are a few things that I just want to point out. The first that's going to be sort of immediately relevant is in the top right-hand side of the screen, and I'm going to zoom in here. Top right-hand side, if you hit the gear icon right next to your name, you'll see a section that says Account and Email Settings. So like I had said earlier, the reason why, even beyond just the verification code when you sign up, that you use a real email is that Piazza will send you emails periodically to make sure you're sort of aware of what's happening on the platform and who else is sort of asking questions. So right below where your sort of profile information is, where you can edit your name, your password, if you hit Edit Email Notifications right here, you can update how often you actually get emails. I would advise that you actually choose to get a daily update, so you get one email every single day from Piazza, because there are going to be a lot of other students on the platform asking a lot of really interesting and relevant questions that'll probably help you instead of actually having to kind of repeat a question that's already been asked. Also, right below it, you have a second option, which is, I had said earlier, anytime any of you personally post a question or a note, and an instructor or another student decides to answer that question, you can choose to opt into a real-time email, so you'll immediately get notified, and you don't feel like you have to wait until the next time you log into the platform to actually check whether or not your question's been answered. So whatever it is that you do decide to opt into, just pick those options, select the relevant radio button, and hit Save Settings. If I zoom out again, it'll say my email preferences have been saved. Hit OK to dismiss the modal. And then if I zoom in again here, and near the top, if I go back to sort of the nav bar, right next to where it says 1337, which is sort of the name or course code of our class, let's call it, it says Q&A. If you hit Q&A, it takes us back to the main screen. So the two things here on the main screen is to the left-hand side of the screen, as you guys are all facing it, is a question feed. It's like any other feed, like your Facebook feed, your Instagram feed. It's just a feed of questions, but they're arranged chronologically. They're not at all affected by anyone sort of endorsing a question or giving it a thumbs up or a like. So generally, as you sort of work through the game, Any of the earlier problems will tend to be towards the bottom of the feed, while sort of later questions, later problems will tend to be towards the top of the feed. That isn't a hard and fast rule, but it tends to be sort of the pattern you see overwhelmingly. So if you do actually select any one of these questions, and I'll go towards the bottom because we've had more answers and more interactions on each of those questions. To the right-hand side of the screen, this is where you'll see sort of the question detail view. So anytime you actually ask a question, you can sort of add any additional context or information. This is definitely important because while most instructors will actually choose to sign up on Pico CTF and choose to play through the game at their own pace as well, usually they won't be at the same level as you, or without any additional context, they may not know what specific question you may have. So you need to make it as easy as possible for them to actually help you. So you need to help yourself in doing that. Give them as much context as possible. Post screenshots if you want, or directly copy and paste the question or any links the questions have. And so you'll be able to add it to the question itself that you're asking. And then the way the platform works is it's kind of wiki style. So once a question has been asked, actually any other student or instructor can edit that question to add additional context. Of course, the etiquette on the platform is unless you have a very, very, very good reason to add or update someone's already existing question, don't touch their question, don't edit it in any way unless it's very obvious that something has been stated incorrectly. And even then, always make sure to prefix and edit with the words edit and then colon, and then add anything else below it. So below every single question, you'll see two things. One is that there is a crowdsourced student answer. So every single question will only ever have one student answer. And then the exact same thing right below it is every single question will only ever have one instructor answer. And so again, the way these work is wiki style. And so if any one of you decided that, you know what, the student answer of, like, to the question, what is cryptography, isn't enough to actually answer the question where they say it's the art of writing or solving codes, you could choose to add more context, link to external resources. All you would have to do is hit edit. And if any of you did decide to do that right now, it would pop up in a window, and you would actually see right below the question that's the number of people currently editing it. So you can see whether or not it's actively being worked on. Below it, it's the exact same thing. You can't edit our instructor answers, but all of the instructors can collectively come together to form one single answer. If you feel like a question was relevant or sort of did any one of the answers did a really good job of answering the question, you can choose to endorse it and hit the thanks or hit good question up there. Again, like I said, the questions themselves are arranged chronologically. It's not going to change where in the feed you see it. The only thing it is going to act as is a visual indicator or a cue of how well answered a question was, or how interesting or relevant a question is, and how immediately it needs to be answered by an instructor. So below it, you will see one other thing. Every question also has a section for follow-up discussions right here at the bottom of the screen. This question currently doesn't because it was intended more as a sample question. Actually, no, I'll skip to this one. What is forensics? Another sample question. This time there's only a student answer because it was actually asked by an instructor. In this case, it was actually asked by myself about 5 days ago, intended as a sample. So the follow-up discussions essentially act as threads. I feel like most of you are probably familiar with like Reddit. It's the exact same concept. It's just a thread. Anytime you want to add sort of additional context, link to external resources, anything along those lines, it's a much better idea to post it in a follow-up discussion than it is to actually edit the student answer or the actual student's question. And the way it works is, again, in the spirit of like making it so that all of you can sort of interact with each other in as natural a sort of like platform as possible, basis as possible, and you can all sort of edit everything. These radio buttons that you can sort of mark as resolved and unresolved, even if you're not the one who started the thread, you actually have access to flip between those two radio buttons. And you'll notice the one thing that sort of stands out here is when you move from a resolved discussion to an unresolved discussion, again, it acts as a visual cue, a visual identifier that an instructor who is skimming through these things should pay attention, because the expectation is that every single discussion thread that is sort of added to any new question there's some sort of intended outcome. Whether you're looking for additional clarification or more resources, like in this case, I quite literally said I want more resources, and some students and instructors that actually posted some external links that I can go to sort of read up on this, read up on what is forensics and how to actually use it in the context of a CTF or in the context of CanHack. And so every time any one of you does want more resources, does want to sort of add an additional question to the original question that was asked, put it in a discussion thread. You may see 10, 15, 20 threads even on the same question. Don't just bandwagon and add to that sort of train of questions. Create a completely separate and new discussion thread, because again, any one of you can kind of flip back and forth between these radio buttons. And I'm going to say this has definitely been resolved. I've gotten a ton of resources at this point. So you want to make it as easy as possible for an instructor to sort of focus on the exact ask that you have specifically as an individual. And that's easier if each of you has your own individual thread so that you can specifically mark it as resolved. So that's how to actually use Piazza. The only other two things I'll point out is that there are filters up top. So you can filter by unread or updated. I'll zoom in here to make it a little easier to see. You can filter by unread or updated, unresolved, or following, as well as you'll see forensics, cryptography, and the other three types of questions that I had talked about earlier in terms of the types of questions that you'll see on the platform. So you can choose to filter by those as well. I'm going to make a sample question again just so you can all see what it does look like. It will force you to pick at least one tag, but you'll want to add as many tags as that are relevant to the question as possible, only because, again, you want to help yourself to get an instructor actually to help you. You want to make it as easy as possible for them to answer your question. And so the way that's going to work is we have a lot of instructors who have industry experience, but they all tend to specialize in very specific things. They all have their own niche. And so if you can specifically tag your question with the type of question it is, whether it's a forensics question or a cryptography question, it's going to make it easier for the instructors because they're all going to opt into filtering by the specific question type that they're all really good at answering, because that's what they do on a day-to-day basis. If you don't tag your question, that's going to make it hard for them to actually see it, which means it's going to introduce more lag time between you asking the question and you getting your question answered. The one other thing I'll add about lag time between a question being asked and answered is instructors have specifically been told within the first half an hour to an hour of a question being asked, they are specifically not to answer any questions. This is to encourage other students to actually answer each other's questions, because obviously if you can very eloquently sort of exactly point out what the answer is to another student's question, then it's usually pretty clear that you yourself understand exactly what is happening and you have a very good understanding of the problem that you're sort of attacking or working on. If there are any issues, instructors will be sort of filtering through every question on the platform. They'll make sure that a student that has answered another student's question hasn't done so that kind of leaves out some key context or has done anything sort of incorrect. So they'll sort of be endorsing those questions as well, just to make sure they'll have their own section for their own answer. They can add more context there as well. But again, it is to encourage you guys to be answering each other's questions as much as possible. And there are close to 1,500 or 2,000 students all on the platform constantly answering and asking questions. And so there are a lot of really amazing students who have had a ton of previous exposure who will be able to help you through these problems just as well as some of the instructors as well. So the last thing I'll do before moving on is I just hit new post right here in the corner, and this pops up this screen. This is what it looks like when you actually want to ask a question. And so you've got three question types that you can actually ask, or post types. The first, obviously, is an actual question, so you're expecting some sort of answer, whether it's from other students or from an instructor or mentor specifically. The other second type is a note. This is not generally used by students very often. It's more of a thing used by instructors, but it's still an option available to you. What this really means is that you're not asking a question. Really, you just want to say, like, hey, this is something I found that I think is relevant, or I found some really awesome resources. Everyone else, you should go check this out. If you've got something like that, you can absolutely choose to make a note. But again, it's not really commonly used by students. It's more of an instructor thing. And then finally, the last thing you can do is you can actually choose to make a poll. This is somewhat commonly used by students to get a sense of where other students are. On the platform directly, you can kind of see how many times a question has been solved. but it's more in general in terms of how many times has it been solved by anyone on the platform, not specifically the ones competing within CanHack. So you might want to use a poll to actually understand, like, how long did it take everyone else to work on this question? Or what question are you currently on? Or how many points do you actually have? Just to get a sense of like their bearing relative to everyone else. That's a really common reason to use a poll. Obviously, don't use a poll to ask other people like what their main is Smash or anything like that. Like, focus exclusively on CanHack stuff. Don't ask anything that's not relevant. But just so you are aware, those are all the 3 different post types that you have available to you on the platform. The thing right below it is that you can choose to post to the entire class or nothing. This radio button seems sort of nonsensical because it doesn't have an alternative option. The reason I'm pointing it out to you is because instructors do have another option, and I want you to know this. Instructors can actually directly message an individual or a group of individuals in order to sort of point out anything they feel that like maybe a few of you are all sort of lacking a common understanding of without having to post it publicly on the forum itself. So that's why I just want to make that sort of clear to you why there is a radio button with no actual other alternative or option available to you as students. Below that is where I was talking about you can choose to select a folder. I'm going to, again, just sort of pick cryptography. I'm not going to post a question this time because this question already exists. Right below it, the summary is where you would ask your question. The details is what I was talking about, where you add additional context, whether it's screenshots, links to the actual question itself, or anything else you feel like you want to add and is relevant. For any of you who are familiar with it, this rich text editor does have support for Markdown and LaTeX. It's not really common, but I know some people who use those things tend to be quite opinionated, so those are options that are available to you. And then below that, the last option you have available is, it says show my name as, and then it shows you a drop-down right at the bottom, right above post my question. So the option you have available to you as students is, you can either choose to post as yourself, anonymous to every other student, or anonymous to everyone, including instructors on the platform. The reason why this is important is because Piazza is essentially a public forum. We want you to feel comfortable making mistakes, and if you don't feel comfortable making those mistakes or answering or asking questions in a public forum where you feel like there's a spotlight on you, you can choose to post anonymously. The one thing I'm going to say is make sure you choose to post anonymously only to other students. And again, the reason why this is important is because if we see a pattern of you asking 2, 3, 4 questions where there's a recurring theme and there's a real lack of understanding with sort of 1 or 2 very key concepts, an instructor or a few instructors can reach out to you specifically or a group of you and then help you clarify that whatever it is, which we can't do if you choose to post anonymously to us. So just be aware of that. Absolutely use this option as much as possible, as much as you'd like. That's why we've made it available to you. But my strong recommendation is that you only choose to ever post anonymously to other students, not to the instructors themselves. So in this case, I'm going to elect to not post my question because I've already asked it. But if I were to hit post my question, it would look exactly like this, which we've already seen. And so it would kind of just be blank, and all you would see is just the question itself, what is cryptography, and then any additional context or details I would have added. That's an overview of how to use Piazza. Does anyone have any questions around how to use the platform? Just really quickly. OK, wonderful. The one other thing I will add is you can now use Piazza to ask us questions about Piazza. So absolutely take advantage of that. And again, another reminder is this is where all of the sort of main interactions will be facilitated between you as students and the mentors. But you will also have one other opportunity in person today in the afternoon. We'll have a few mentors come through who will be sort of working with you more on a one-on-one or a one to sort of like few in terms of groups to help you through any specific questions and challenges you do have. So that's how to use Piazza. So now we're gonna hit pause here, and we're gonna come back over to how to actually use a terminal. So does anyone know what a terminal or a shell is? I use them interchangeably. They're slightly different, but for the purposes of this, I'm going to say really they're the same thing. Yes?
Command line-based program.
Yes, it is a command line-based program. If I were to swipe over, this is what I'm talking about. It pretty much is just all text, and I know that this is a cursor, and so my expectation is if this is completely text-based, I should at least be able to interact with it with other text. And so for any of you that are using Macs, the easiest way to actually access something like this would be to type or to use the keys command space and then type in terminal. On Windows, it can get a little trickier. You do have command prompt and PowerShell, but they're not quite the same. The reason why I'm going to say that you should use different tools on Windows, such as Windows Subsystem Linux or Git Bash or anything else like that, is because when you're playing through the game, and we'll get to it in a few minutes, about 20 minutes or so after we cover this, is there actually is a shell or a terminal within the web browser part of Pico CTF that you will need to access a lot of the questions. And so being able to navigate in a terminal is actually going to be really key, a really key skill to have as you sort of work past maybe the first 10 questions or so on the platform. And so don't worry too much if you're on Windows right now, or even if you're on Mac. You really just need to follow along at this point. But if you're trying to get set up, again, we'll have people in person in the afternoon portion. But also, we've sent all of your teachers a document or like sort of a technical guide that shows you how to get set up and links to external resources, sort of regardless of whatever platform or OS you choose to use, whether that's Windows, Mac OS, or even Linux. Although if you are using Linux, I hope you at least know how to use the terminal at that point. And so we will help you get set up. Don't worry about that. And then there is also, like I had mentioned, a terminal within the game. So if you choose or elect not to set it up on your own local machines, also totally fine, because you'll be able to use the one within the platform on Pico CTF as well. So actually coming back to this, if we look at the text here, trying to understand what this is, I've got a little bit of information, but not a ton, I think. It says last logged in like Wednesday, October 2nd, and I've got like a timestamp. I've got something in brackets that says base. Quick pause here. Can anyone at the back not see clearly what it is I'm pointing at on the screen? Just raise your hand if you want me to kind of increase the font size here. Good? OK. So I see that it says base in brackets. Doesn't really tell me much. What base? It says MacBook Pro, which I could have like understood just by looking at it. That doesn't really help me. Then I see a weird little squiggly line right next to it. And then right next to that, it says my username, which is Usain Bolt. So now I'm trying to understand, like, what can I actually do here? Sure, I can type in text, but is the computer actually going to be able to understand whatever it is I tell it to do? Odds are, probably not. We have to be very specific when we want to tell computers what we want them to do. That's the whole idea around programming. But there are already a lot of tools and a lot of programs that already exist within our terminal that we can take advantage of so that we don't have to explicitly tell the computer the exact steps that we want it to take to execute something. Instead, we can rely on someone else's really hard work and just say, hey, I know that there's sort of this built-in tool that I want to use to achieve this specific task. I just need to know how to exactly call it or how to actually use the program. So the first thing I want to do, actually, is just get my bearings. I have no idea where I am. The one thing I'm going to tell you is that like you can almost treat this, at least very simply at the beginning, as a sort of one-to-one between using a GUI, like a Finder or a Windows Explorer or anything else you would use on Linux to sort of navigate through your computer or your file and directory structure or hierarchy. And so if you wanted to get a sense of where you were in a GUI, you would just look at the top. It would tell you exactly where you are in your computer. Or you might click through to anywhere on the side. So for instance, if I did open up Finder, I've got a ton of files. I could click through to the side, and I could kind of click desktop or downloads, and I would immediately know where I am. With this, I have zero context. So that's probably going to want to be the first thing I choose to do. One other thing I'll add is, in the context of computer science, in the context of really the terminal, we use the terms folder and directory interchangeably. But usually when we're talking about something specifically, we'll want to use the term directory as opposed to the word folder. So if I'm trying to understand like what my current directory is, another way I might say that is my working directory, because I'm currently trying to work inside of that space, inside of that folder. So the first thing I want to do is sort of just have the computer tell me what my working directory is. Does anyone actually want to take a guess, or maybe even if you know, how I would tell the computer to actually help me understand what my working directory is right now at this very moment? Does anyone want to raise their hands, or I can totally call on some people too? OK, someone from that table. Anyone? You guys can decide as a group. Yeah. Just take a guess. It's OK if you don't know it. Type in Active Directory. I know you're raising your hand. You want to add something?
Maybe help.
Help? OK, I'll try both of those things. So typing in Active Directory doesn't work, but it's definitely on the right track because the things we'll want to do, the actions we want to take, are actually going to be very closely related to the actual specific thing we're going to type into the computer to take that action. Typing in help does do something, and it just kind of overloads me with information, none of which I can really understand at this point. So one thing I will tell you as a command, sort of as a cop-out, is there's a really awesome command called clear, and it does exactly what you think it does. If you type in clear and hit enter, it'll clear my entire screen so it looks just like before. But if I actually do choose to scroll up, I haven't lost anything I've typed in before. But if I scroll all the way back down to the bottom, I can sort of focus on the exact new task at hand. Yes? I could use the command cd for change directory, and that is absolutely true. But I'm still trying to get a sense of where I am. I don't even know what other directories are available. ls? OK, so ls does do something. ls does tell me a little bit more about where I am, and ls is just a shortened form for list. So one thing you'll sort of realize as we walk through some of these commands is computer scientists tend to be a bit of a lazy bunch. So even though list is literally only 4 characters, that's 2 characters too many. And so we've elected to shorten it even further. And so as opposed to typing in the 4 characters to spell out the word list, just by typing in ls, it actually tells us everything else that's all the other directories and files in whatever this current folder is. So I can see I've got a desktop and documents, pictures and a projects folder. But I still don't know where I am, right? I see that there are other directories. Wherever it is I am, there are other directories here. But what directory am I currently in? pwd is a good command. Does anyone want to guess at what that actually stands for? Someone other than you. Someone who wants to take a guess at it. Yeah. Exactly. So if I wanted to print my working directory, as opposed to typing in print working directory, which the computer does not understand, because it doesn't even understand what the word print means, I'm instead going to elect to just shorten it to its abbreviated form, which is pwd. And instead of maybe taking up close to 20, 25 characters, now I've shortened it to only 3, and it does actually give me some information. Again, computer scientists are lazy. Probably the action you're trying to take and the exact command you're going to use are probably pretty closely tied, and all you're really doing is shortening the word to maybe to its abbreviated form, or taking out a few letters and just shortening it to make it as easy as possible to type it as quickly as possible. So if I do type in pwd, or print working directory, now I've got even more information. Now I know I'm in /users/Hussein Bolt. So now I understand I'm in my home folder, which is why when I type in ls or list, I can see my desktops, I can see my documents, because that's what you should expect to see in every user's home folder. So also, as one of the students here pointed out, or one of your colleagues pointed out, is that there is another command I can do, right? So now I've finally really gotten my bearings here. I know where I am. I'm in my home folder. I know that there are other directories or folders contained within my home folder, which is there's my desktop and my documents. But now I can use a command that they pointed out called cd, or change directory. That actually allows me to do something. So I could choose to type in cd, but the other thing I need to actually remember is that I need to give the computer context. Like, maybe that'll do something, maybe that won't do something, but it's probably a good idea to not just leave things up to chance. I don't want to do things randomly. If I want to change directory, when you use a GUI, when you use your Finder or Windows Explorer, and you click on a specific folder, you expect to be able to go into that specific folder. You don't expect the computer to randomly decide where you're going to end up. In the same way, if we're trying to change directory, we'll generally have a very good idea of where we're trying to go. Otherwise, there really is no point in just trying to type in things at random. And so what we need to now offer the computer is additional context. So if I'm going to type in cd or change directory, I now need to decide where am I going to go. Does anyone want to just pick a folder at random from the ones we can see are already clearly listed here within my home folder? Sure. We can go to the desktop. So if we type in cd and then give it a space, because we want the computer to be able to understand that this is sort of two different things. The first is the command. We'll give it a space. And then really the second thing we're giving it is more context. I'm going to type in desktop. And I don't know how many of you caught that, so I'm going to do it again. I typed in cd, I gave it a space, and then I typed in 3 characters, and then the rest sort of auto-completed. It didn't do it by itself. But again, if we remember, like I'd said earlier, computer scientists are lazy. What I actually elected to do there was hit the key tab. And so if it seems obvious to a computer that, like, you know what, I typed in the first 3 characters, D, E, S, and it's very obvious that, like, this is listed in alpha order, that there's only one directory that starts with those 3 specific characters, the computer is smart enough to realize that that's the only directory or folder I could be referring to. And so I just saved myself an additional 5 characters of typing by typing in DES and then hitting tab. I could have done the same thing just by typing in the first 2 characters, because again, there's no other collisions. There's no other folder or directory that starts with the characters D and E. So if I do actually hit enter, now maybe what you'll notice here is something's changed from here to here. Can anyone see it and wants to point it out? Maybe someone else. Someone, yes. Yeah, it does say desktop. So instead of this weird little squiggly line, now it says desktop. And so if we think back to where we were when we got our bearings and we typed in pwd or print working directory for the first time, which, as it happens to be right above it, /users/Hussein Bolt, or our home folder, is actually the same thing as this weird little squiggly line. And so that's actually what it's referring to. And so we don't always need to type in pwd for trying to get our bearings here, because now it'll actually just show me what folder I'm currently in. But it's always a good idea if we're not totally sure of the exact path we're in. Maybe we've gone 10, 20, 30 folders deep, and we want to know exactly how we ended up there. It's still always a good idea just to verify, just to type in pwd again, print working directory, and see now I can verify in /users/Hussein Bolt, I'm now in my desktop directory. So I've managed to move into a folder. I can now also type in ls, right, or list, and I can see the other things that are here. There's a lot of CanHack stuff, naturally, right? There's a mentor debrief, there's some PowerPoints. But now if I want to actually go back up, well, first what I'm going to do is I'm going to do clear. If I actually wanted to go back up, anyone know what you might do? Because before, when we wanted to move into a folder, we were able to hit ls, hit enter, and we would understand all of the other folders or directories that are in the current folder we're in. But if we want to go up, that's not really in our current folder, so that doesn't really make sense. So does anyone want to guess at how you might actually go up one level in the directory structure? Sure. Right. And so how would I use that information? So just to repeat it for anyone who didn't hear, you correctly pointed out that, like, typing in pwd or just kind of seeing anything else, we do have a lot of context for where exactly in the directory structure we are. But, like, how do we actually make use of that information to go up one level? Do you want to sort of finish that off for me then? So we could type in print working directory, and then you're saying if we wanted to go up one level, we would copy everything but the very last bit of that part, right? The current folder we're in, type in cd, and then paste it just the way we had sort of typed in the directory we're trying to move into. We could do the same thing to move out of it. And if we hit enter, that does in fact work, and that's absolutely one way to do it. But in fact, again, because we're lazy, computer scientists have decided, you know what, there should be a shorter way to do that. We shouldn't have to do that copying and pasting every single time. So if I were to move into my desktop again, and I'll type in pwd or print working directory to verify it, right? I am still in my desktop folder now. Rather than choosing to print my working directory, copy it, except for the last folder, and then move up a level, does anyone want to guess, or I could just say it? Do you want to say it? So cd, space, and then dot, dot. And that absolutely is the right way to do it. I won't get into the nitty-gritty of why that works. Honestly, for the purposes of this, you should just know that that is shorthand for moving up one level. So if you type in CD followed by space and then 2 dots, that's the easiest way to actually move up one level. And so now, just with really those 3 quick commands, those like with ls, pwd, and cd, which all stand for list, print working directory, and change directory, respectively, you already now can navigate throughout your computer's directory structure or hierarchy the same way you could in Windows Explorer or Finder. And all it took was really, fewer than 10 characters to remember those commands. So now I can sort of navigate throughout my computer, but I still want to be able to do 2 other things that I'm going to say I think are relevant. I want to actually be able to create some structure within that hierarchy. I want to be able to create folders, and I want to be able to delete folders, so I can actually start organizing all of my files within directories. So if I wanted to make a directory, and I've moved up now back to our original home folder, so it's just users/Hussein Bolt, which again I'll verify by typing in pwd or print working directory. And if I want to see what else is there, I'll type in ls to list. I want to create a new folder. You know what? I don't think really these folders or directories sort of accurately encompass all of the different types of things I could be doing. Maybe I need a new folder for, I don't know, all the really interesting things I want to buy, like shopping, let's say. Does anyone want to take a guess at how I might make a new directory? And it's going to be very similar to the way we thought about the other sort of commands that we needed to run in order to get something done. Make directory, and maybe as the action we're trying to take, is going to map pretty closely to the exact words or command you're going to type in to actually make that directory. Anyone want to take a guess at it? Sure. NF? New folder? So probably shouldn't type in random characters on the off chance that it actually does something, because I'm not sure whether or not that could actually translate to something. That's just good, infosec. NF would not work. One thing I'll remind you guys of, again, is generally when we're working with a terminal, we don't want to use the word folder. We want to use the word directory. So I'll also then go ahead and anticipate, just in case, if any of you were to think maybe it's new directory, and ND for short, that is not the command either. So I was very intentional in the way I phrased it. I said I wanted to make a directory. So someone say MD. Along the right track. But unfortunately, MD, it could probably stand for a lot of things. So as much as we are lazy, we still do want to be able to go from whatever the action is, also mapping back to the full form of it. So we might want a few more characters. But you've got 2 of, let's say, the 5. Anyone else want to add the other 3? It is mkdir, which is the shortened form for make directory. Again, that's why it's very intentional in the way I phrased it. So as lazy as we are as computer scientists, we also want to be able to go back and forth between this mapping of the action I'm trying to take and the exact command I'm going to type in. So make directory, and again, just like with CD, we don't want our computer just doing things at random. We want to give it more context. So I am going to say make directory, but now I'm also going to give it a name. So in this case, I was thinking, OK, maybe I want a new folder for all the little screenshots I might take of things I'm thinking about buying or shopping. But maybe there's another reason. Does anyone have a name for a folder that they want to give me that they want me to create? Otherwise, I can stick with shopping. And it can be anything if you do have a name. Sure. Games? You're right. Games is definitely absent here. So let's create a games directory. So all I've done now is I've typed in make directory, or mkdir for short, added games, of course making sure to add a space between the 2, and hit enter. So I'm going to assume it's been made, but making assumptions is never a good idea. I should obviously verify this. The way I can verify this, again, is to type ls, or list. And now I can see, right below downloads, I now have a new folder called games, which before, if we were to look just slightly above that, was not there before. So I can create a directory. I can move into a directory just like I did before. I can type in cd, or change directory, type in games after it, and really I should be lazy there. There's only one directory that starts with the letter G. So I'm going to hit tab, which again sort of auto-completes if it's obvious to the computer what you're referring to. And then I'm going to hit enter. And now again, we can verify that our squiggly line has now moved to, it now says games instead. If I want to double check just to be sure, I'm going to type in pwd, or print working directory again. And now I can sort of double check that, yes, now I am in /users/UsainBolt/games. I've moved into this new directory. And honestly, guys, I'm not going to play games. So I'm going to move back out. And I'm going to type in cd and then ... for short, as opposed to copying and pasting the path, which does work, but is a lot longer than just typing in 2 dots. If I hit enter again, I can see now that I've come back to the weird little squiggly line. I'm going to hit clear just to make it a little bit nicer to look at. And now the last thing I want to do is, like I said, I'm going to level with you guys. I have no interest in playing games. That folder doesn't make any sense for me, so I'm just going to delete it. Clicking it doesn't really do anything. I can't just right-click and hit delete. It's not a GUI. It's not Finder. It's not Windows Explorer. We've been using commands this whole time. So again, if we're thinking about the exact action we're trying to take, now I'm going to say I just want to remove the directory. If we know make directory maps to mkdir for short, remove directory is probably going to map pretty closely and look very similar to that as well. Anyone want to take a guess at what that command would be, what that action would be? Maybe someone who hasn't answered a question, possibly? Maybe someone from that table. Does anyone want to guess there, like how you would remove a directory, or what the command would be? RMDIR? It would be rmdir. So rmdir, or remove directory, is the command you would use to delete a directory. And again, I don't want to just delete everything. I need to give it context. So I'm now going to add remove directory, type in games. And if I hit enter, again, I could assume it's been done. But it's always a good idea to double check, to verify. So if I type in ls or list, now I can see I've gone from having downloads games library to downloads library logs. And I no longer have a games directory or a folder. So those sort of 5 quick commands sort of already help you to navigate throughout a terminal or throughout your directory structure on a computer, create structure and organization by creating and removing directories. And that already sort of gives you enough of an overview of how to use a terminal to really be, to actually make use of it within the context of the game. And as one of your fellow colleagues or students pointed out earlier, one command that actually does work is help, because there have been many times when frustrated computer scientists will just look at their terminal, sigh, and have no idea what to do. So they'll type in help, and someone thankfully actually made it so that does something. Now, this is just sort of overkill. I feel most of you will have trouble parsing it. I could parse this, and I wouldn't even bother trying to understand it. If you're trying to take a specific action, you already sort of know what you're trying to do in the terminal. Like I said, it maps pretty cleanly back to the commands you're trying to actually enter into the command line. Don't ever just guess at them, though, because you might type in something that could actually break your computer, because this is a pretty powerful tool. Instead, what you should be doing is Googling things. Google is your best friend. It doesn't make you any less of a developer or a programmer. In fact, it's like the favorite tool of someone who is in industry. Googling is absolutely the first thing you should do. If you choose to use help, or in certain cases, it might be man or manual for short, you can do that. You can try to parse this. And if that works for you, that's great. But otherwise, don't try to follow along with tutorials. That's really only going to slow you down. It's way easier to just be like, hey, I'm trying to do this specific thing. Maybe I want to know more about what the specific file is, or I want to be able to rename 1,000 different folders or directories all at once, all sort of numerically ordered. I could do all of that, and instead of trying to Google my way through like a tutorial that maybe eventually will teach me, I should just Google the exact thing I'm trying to do. So hopefully that's what all of you are going to do. That's an overview of how to use a terminal. Does anyone have any questions before we sort of switch over to playing through a few quick games? Yes? Sure. So we'll add a little more information here. So if I type in clear, just again to make it a little easier to read, one of you pointed out that you can type in ls, you can add a dash, and then you can do something like the letter A. If you hit enter, this actually looks way different from just typing in ls or list, right? Now I've got all this other weird stuff that starts with dots and stuff. So just like with cd or make directory or remove directory, where we're giving it more context, sometimes we'll realize, as much as a tool is great by itself, by default, sometimes we need a little more information. Maybe we want to give it more context so it can give us more information. So when you type in dash and then add a bunch of characters after it, sometimes, sometimes characters like strings or letters, sometimes it's numbers, but not as often. What you're adding essentially is something called a flag. So a flag is another way to give it more context. In this specific case, when you typed in -a, what you've told the list command is, I want you to list everything, but I mean literally everything. So the A actually is short for all. And so sometimes there are actually folders or directories within the folder you're currently in that are actually hidden to you as a user. If you were to open up this folder, my home folder, which I can do actually right now, just by typing in open dot, which is another command you can do, only on OS X though, it'll open up all these directories that are currently available to me, right? And it looks pretty similar to typing in ls. I can see logs and movies and all of those folders, but none of these folders that start with a dot actually show up. The reason why is the assumption is when you're an average user using the GUI, using Finder, using Windows Explorer, you don't need to see these hidden folders. They're not relevant to you. But as a developer, there may be a very specific reason for you to be exposed to these things. You may actually want to change something that is in a hidden folder. So when you see something prefixed with an actual dot, it's either a hidden file or a hidden directory. And that's what it means. So when we add the context of -a to the command ls specifically, it shows us all of the stuff, or everything, including hidden files and directories within the folder we're currently in. Does that answer your question? Perfect. Does anyone else have any additional questions around like how to use a terminal, or even going back to Piazza or anything else? Nope? OK, so what we're going to do for the next 15 to 20 minutes is we're going to make sure all of you actually are on Pico CTF. You can actually play through the game. And so what you'll need to do for this is, if I tab over here, I need all of you to actually just go to picoctf.com. If you go to that site, this is what it's going to look like. We'll take another second here. I'm going to come around. Raise your hand if you're still having an issue with the Wi-Fi, if you're having trouble getting to this site. Maybe it's blocked on your computer for whatever reason. Let me know. We'll figure it out. And once you're there, just hang tight, and we'll make sure you're on the platform. Cool, yeah. So now that everyone's pretty much on the site here, all you have to do is just go to the top right-hand side of the screen in the nav bar where it says register and sign in. So I'll just zoom in here, top right-hand side of the screen. If you click it, it turns into a drop-down. I'll just point out that you can play through last year's game as practice later on. Right now, what's going to be relevant is Pico CTF 2019, which is currently live. If you go ahead and select that, it'll take you to a pretty standard registration or like sign-in page. Is there anyone here, just raise your hands, who hasn't been registered on the platform by your teacher and hasn't been given credentials to log in? OK, so for those of you that haven't registered, you'll be able to register with your teacher and get on your classroom in a little bit. We'll do it like sort of at lunch. For the time being, you can register as individuals. So if you hit register, all you have to do is, it's pretty straightforward, enter a username. I'll just type in this is legit. Enter a password. Again, remember, this is a cyber information security competition. Nobody use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's a terrible idea. You should obviously add the 7. And then enter your email. You can use whatever email you want. Again, in the interest of this being a cybersecurity competition, you can use a throwaway, but at least make it an email you have access to. This is also how you're going to do it so that your teacher can give you access to the specific classroom that you guys are in, so you can compete as a school and actually be eligible. So make sure that's an email that works. Otherwise, you could be the top team, and you're not going to get anything. And that's like a few $1,000s you're missing out on. So make sure you use the real email. Beyond that, it's all pretty straightforward in terms of drop-downs. Your country of residence, obviously Canada. Your status is going to be a middle/high school student. You can enter your school name, which is what in this case? What school are you guys from? Northern? Cool. You can enter your full school name. You enter your current grade, your school's zip code and country. In terms of how did you hear about Pico CTF, you can elect to click any one of them: friends, teacher, social media. You can select the gender identity that you most identify with, as well as your age. Fill out the CAPTCHA. Fairly straightforward. Now I'm doing some free labeling work for Google. Google, you're welcome. I'm going to select all of the crosswalks. Feel like you've all done CAPTCHAs before at this point. And all I would have to do at this point is just hit register, assuming I'd filled out all of the relevant information, and I'd be registered on the platform. I'm going to swipe back here for a second, if it lets me, and just go back to log in. I do have an account, so I'm going to hit log in. I'm going to pause here. Again, make sure that all of you are able to register if you haven't already. If anyone's having trouble, again, raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm coming around. I want to make sure you guys are all signed into the platform, because there's no point in going through the challenge if you can't even see the challenge. And then once that's done, we'll play through maybe 2 or 3 sort of easy questions, get you familiar with the platform, point out some relevant things, and then we'll break for lunch. So again, raise your hand. Nonetheless, I'll be coming around, but raise your hand if you definitely have an issue with the platform and getting signed up. So you're on. You're good. Yep, good. Good. Almost all of you at this point are on the platform, are all signed in. As you guys are sort of getting to this page, I'll just point out a few things. You're going to work with your teacher afterwards to make sure you're part of your specific classroom or associated with your school. So don't worry about that. Don't worry about this classroom membership stuff at the top. Also below it, generally you work through the CTF in teams. You can create your own teams. You can do it again afterwards at your own leisure, at your own pace. Don't worry about doing it right now. And then all of this other stuff around updating your password. Most of you just made your accounts now. You're not going to immediately update your password. Don't worry about any of this stuff really is what I'm saying. Just know that these are options available to you that you can get back to just by clicking your username up top. So once you guys are all pretty much here on the platform, there are a few, let's call them 5 things, just like the 5 things in the navbar that I'm going to point out. So if you go to the navbar up top in the top right-hand side of the screen, there is the game section. So what's different about Pico CTF as compared to most traditional CTFs is that CTFs tend to be more challenge-oriented. It's more trivia style, or hey, here's a server, go figure out what's wrong with it, break it, do whatever you need to do sort of thing. Pico CTF, because it is intended as a beginner CTF, and we're trying to make it as easy as possible for anyone with 0 exposure to programming and cybersecurity to get started, is they've actually built at Carnegie Mellon an entire game that is a one-to-one mapping between all of the questions that you'll be asked, actually within the context of a video game with an overarching storyline. So most of you will probably elect to play through the game in this way, and just cover your ears. You might hear a bunch of sounds if this loads, because it does have a soundtrack. Yep. So it is a legitimate video game. They've got animators and musicians and soundtrack people and stuff all working on it. Most of you will probably choose to play through it this way because it's the easiest way to sort of get familiar with the platform, play through it if you don't have experience or exposure to programming or to cybersecurity at all. If you do have exposure, you do have experience, or maybe you just don't like video games for whatever reason, I get it, that's perfectly all right. What you should do then instead is right next to where it says games, is you can just select challenge problems, and I've seen some of you already on this section of the site. This is mapped directly one-to-one with all of the questions asked of you in the game. So you can choose to sort of just rip through all of the problems here. A few things to point out here is you can see as sort of an indicator of how difficult the problem is the number of times it's actually been solved by other users. You can also see to the right-hand side of every single box where it actually says the type of skills or the type of question required, or the type of question this question is asking of you, whether it's general skills, forensics, web exploits, whatever it may be, and whether or not you've currently solved it or it remains unsolved. And you can also filter by the left-hand side of the screen with all the exact same things, solved or unsolved questions, a specific type of question, or even searching by score, category, or name. What I will point out here is that sometimes the number of times the question has been solved can be deceiving. And so the one I'll point out here, quite obviously, is the factory secret. It says it has 1 point, and it's right at the top. as opposed to all of these ones that I've sort of solved as examples. And it's only been solved 700 times roughly, as opposed to like the question right below it, which has been solved over 11,000 times. Obviously, the 1 point question isn't like 10 or 15 times more difficult. The only reason why is you have to have additional context. This question actually directly links you back inside the game. So even though it is a one-to-one mapping, sometimes you'll be forced to play through the game no matter what. And that's why most people, especially like the serious competitors or people who just don't want to play through the video game, are choosing to skip this question because it's literally only worth 1 point. You'll get 50 times that for solving the next question. And it's quite time consuming, which is why I've also elected to kind of just skim past it. So generally solves is a good number, a good indication of how difficult a problem is, but also pay attention to context. There may be a very good reason why something has a low number of solves, but what may in fact actually be a fairly straightforward question. So if we do come back though, there are 3 other things I'll point out. Next to where it says challenge problems, it also says shell, right? Like I had said, shell, terminal, I use those 2 terms interchangeably. They're not quite the exact same thing, but for the purposes of this, you should more or less treat them as that. So this hopefully looks fairly similar to what we were doing in our terminal over here, right? It's a little harder to see because the text is smaller, but what it's going to prompt you to do is actually enter your username and password. A couple common things here is that 1, your username and password are the exact same ones you used to actually sign in, and I'll hit full screen here. The exact same ones you'll use to log into the platform. I'm trying to see if I can zoom in. Zoom has been disabled on this specific website, which is a little annoying. So it'll ask you for enter your username, and then it'll say enter your password. Whatever you use to sign up on Pico CTF, you enter exact same creds here, and then you'll have access to a shell that looks pretty much the same as what we were using. All of the commands we learned will work in this shell. The one thing also that I'll point out is that when you're entering the password, like your specific passwords, trying to get access to the shell, you're not going to see anything actually being written. It's going to look like you're typing, but nothing's happening. That's intentional by design. In certain shells, when you're entering something that is actually like sensitive, like a password, what a terminal or a shell will sometimes do by default is it won't actually show that you're typing, so that like anyone looking over your shoulder can't understand the entropy or the length of your password, which makes it even more difficult for them to just kind of glance over your shoulder and figure out what your password is. So if you come up against this, and I'll do it, which it is a little hard to see, but if I were to type in my username, it does say enter your platform password, and it does remind you characters will be hidden. I'm obviously mashing my keys on my keyboard. Nothing is happening, but it has in fact typed in the background. You just can't see it. Again, just someone looking over your shoulder can't just figure out, oh, your password's only 6 characters long. It's definitely 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If we exit this then for a second and come back to the actual thing, 2 more things that are relevant. One is next to the shell is a scoreboard. So you guys are definitely all going to want to see this. There are 3 scoreboards that are relevant. One is that there's one specifically for US middle and high school students. Again, Pico CTF runs a similar type of challenge for students in the US. This isn't relevant to you. What you need to pay attention to is the scoreboard that says Canadian high school students, right next to it over here. This is what you need to be tracking to see if you're on the first page of the leaderboard, or even if you're on the top 3 and you're going to end with a podium finish, and whether you're going to be eligible for some prizes. I will point out, because I can still appreciate this, that the top team literally says sponsored by RBC as their team name, which I absolutely love. And then right next to it, because I did say Pico CTF is a totally open platform, there is a global leaderboard. So anyone can play through this, and for whatever reason, I've elected to end up on the 113th page of the leaderboard. I must have been looking at something. Oh, I guess, yeah, that maps up pretty cleanly with my score. At 1,400, I was trying to see where I ranked up globally. This game is actually played by not just students, by even industry veterans. It's a great way to kind of just refine your skills, because there are really interesting challenges as you go through it that even people that have been in industry for a very long time would at the very least find interesting, if not difficult. Yes, do you have a question?
Is there a max score?
There is a max score if you do solve all the questions. I'm not aware of what that score is, though.
34,000.
34,000? Thank you, Asib. Then I'm not sure. Yeah, if there's a team with more than 34,000, then that might be off. There may be something carrying forward from a previous game. I'm not totally certain.
The total
3421 is the exact number? Yeah. OK. So that would make sense. It ends in a 1 because we've only got a one-point question, which is the very first one. So yeah, it's somewhere around 34,201. I will verify that for you and let you guys know. I'll post that on Piazza if you guys are curious. But so this global leaderboard, it's a good sense of just like trying to figure out where you are relative to everything, but it isn't relevant. The one you need to pay attention to is Canadian high school students. Last thing, right next to the scoreboard is the news section. You're very rarely going to need to check this. Really, when you would check this is sometimes, if there's a server outage, you're working on a problem and things are just not working, but you're fairly certain what you're doing is correct or you're on the right track. Maybe the reason it's not working is because the problem is actually currently not live. Something's gone wrong, it's been disabled, maybe it's down. Whatever reason that may be, it might get posted here, it might not. What we're going to be doing for you, and this is why we get you on Piazza, is we're going to pin that post, and that's currently the pinned post right now in Piazza, so that you can actually see, hey, maybe I'm doing everything right, and the only issue is that they've literally taken the problem down. This is where you'll see all of that information. If you want to see it in real time, this is where it'll be. Otherwise, we've mirrored that one-to-one on our Piazza platform. And then last thing, I'm going to just show you how to actually play through a challenge or two. I've got a few minutes here. I'm going to play through 2 very quick challenges. Let's see. There's one called Let's Warm Up.
Maybe you can do it in the game format.
It'll add lag. I have to navigate to the challenge as well. Yeah, so good point. The only reason I'm choosing to do it in this format is because it would make it considerably more difficult for me to navigate to the exact problem I want to show you guys. But you would all probably start in the game format. So this first question, this is how simple it starts. If you were told a word started with 0x70 in hexadecimal, what would it start with in ASCII? So you might not even know what hexadecimal is, what ASCII is, what any of this means. And you can learn all of that. But what I'm going to encourage you guys to do is that as much as PicoCTF, as much as playing through this is about learning, part of it is also just kind of getting to the answer as quickly as possible, because you'll learn things along the way. You'll figure it out. So the first thing I would advise you to do, just like with the terminal, if you've got a question and you don't know how to answer it, Google it. So what I'm going to try and Google is hexadecimal to ASCII. I found a tool. I'm going to enter 0x70. If I hit convert, it tells me the answer is P. And if I just copy and paste that, that is my answer. But if I were to hit submit in this text box, that would actually tell me I hadn't solved the question. The reason why is because when you're playing through a CTF, you have to actually format it in a way that the computer's going to understand, and it's very specific in the way you have to format it. Every time you enter a flag, and a flag is the answer to a question, you need to always prefix it with the word PicoCTF, where the CT and F are all capitalized. Add curly braces, and within the curly braces, you need to add the actual flag or the answer to the question. So in this case, to actually accurately answer or solve the question, I would type in Pico, capitalize CT and F, add curly braces, and then add the answer, which is the letter lowercase p. And then if I hit submit, I would have actually solved it for the second time, let's say, and that would have been my first 50 points for the question, let's warm up. Which is why, again, good indication of how easy it is. It's been solved 16,000 times. Even though it's not right at the top, it's been solved more times than this question, which is the second one, and it's only been solved 11,000 times. Yes?
If you answer the same question twice, you can't get 2 times.
No, you will not get, you can't double up on points. Otherwise, people would obviously have gamed the system and answered easy questions 100 times. But good question, though. You can only ever get the points once. You can answer it multiple times, but it doesn't really do anything. It's more for demonstration purposes. Other thing I'll point out, we'll only play through this. This was as simple as I wanted to start, just showing you the things. There are hints for most of the earlier questions, so always do check these. These will absolutely put you on the right track. For instance, this one, because it was fairly straightforward, the only hint is a reminder that you need to format it in this specific way, where you add PicoCTF as the prefix, add the curly braces, and then the answer within the curly braces. Sometimes you may get an answer where it may actually require you to put PicoCTF in all caps or in all lowercase or whatever it may be. Always check a hint if there is one, even if you don't feel like you need it, because, again, you might have the right answer, but if you're formatting the flag incorrectly, you're not going to get the answer. You're not going to get the points that are actually like whatever the point value is for that question. You're not going to get it unless you format the answer to that question in the exact way that Pico CTF has specified for you. So that's as easy as the questions start. It's really as simple as like just even converting between bases. I would absolutely encourage you, if you don't know what it is, to look up hexadecimal, to look up ASCII. We can even talk through it afterwards as well. But I'm going to sort of wrap up here. We've got 5 minutes. Hasib, if you want to add anything else before we break for lunch?
Yeah, we can push one a little bit further, but can you show us a question that you need a terminal for?
Sure. Sure, I can show you a question that you would need the terminal for.
Don't worry about lunch. We can push that a little bit. They're not hungry for knowledge.
What's a good question that would require the terminal? Okay. Oh, here, right off the bat. So this question is called practice run 1. It's practice-run-1. It's worth 50 points. It's been solved only 5,000 times. And it's technically categorized as binary exploitation. So it says that you're going to need to know how to run programs if you're going to get out of here. Navigate to /problems /practice-run /whatever this sort of string of alphanumerics is, occasionally punctuated with underscores, on the shell server, and then run this program, which is a link to actually download a specific program. Again, for those of you who may already know this, very hard to see, but when you hover over a link in Chrome specifically, I think Firefox and Safari do this as well, the bottom left-hand side of the screen, you can see what that links to. So I'm not going to click this because I know this is a downloadable program. It's something I can run. But it says you can run this program and you'll receive a flag. You are immediately off the bat going to need to use the shell to get there. Because this program, you can either elect to download it and run it locally, which again, you'll still need to use the terminal to run it. Or instead of downloading it, which I'm going to choose not to do because I've got enough stuff on my computer, I can copy and paste this file path, go to my shell over here, which again might be a little difficult to see. I'm going to try and zoom in this way. Is that kind of better for you guys? It's like jumping around a lot. Yeah, you can read it back there. So again, I'll remind you, you'll need to enter the same username as password as the one on the platform that you signed up with. Again, it is cybersecurity. I'm not using my real name. It's a throwaway account. It's called Eli Bohr. Enter my platform password. And once I've signed in, it's going to look like this. And all the way at the bottom, doesn't look exactly like what we started with, but it looks somewhat similar. Again, you'll notice the weird squiggly line, which looks a little straight because it's been zoomed in, from before, where it was just referencing the fact that we're in our home directory. So now that we've copied our path, if we remember back to the question, it said we needed to navigate to that path and run a program. So now we can use like the 5 or 6 commands that we've learned in terms of how to navigate through the terminal to do that. First thing we can do, always a good idea, always get your bearings. Sorry, this thing is jumping around a lot. I'm going to have to zoom out. It's not going to work. Let me see if I can full screen and then, aha. OK. There we go. So the first thing you always want to do is get your bearings. Always do pwd, print working directory. At the bottom, a little difficult to see, but it says /home/Eli Bohr. Looks very sort of reminiscent or very familiar, similar to what we were talking about before. On my local machine, it says /users/Hussein Bolt before. So now what I want to do is I've copied and pasted the path from before. If I remember that I want to change directories or move to this new path, then all I would do is type in cd, which is short for change directory. I'm going to paste the path that I copied. It's at the bottom of the screen. If I hit enter, now you'll see before there was this weird squiggly line, right? Remember, that references our home directory. Now, next to the colon, I'm going to see /problem/practice-run1 punctuated with a few underscores and a bunch of alphanumeric characters. So again, I've moved to a directory. Always a good idea to see what else is around. So I'm going to type in ls. And let me see if I can just move this up here a little, actually. There, that's better. I typed in ls, and now there's something that says run this. I'm probably going to assume this is a file and not a directory. But it's always a good idea just to verify. So I can actually type in, and it turns out this is a command, file is a command or a tool you can use within terminal. If I type in file and then the name of whatever it is I'm trying to understand, so again, I typed in run. There's only one other thing there, so I can hit tab to save me a few characters of typing, and hit enter. It says run this is all of this stuff. It's something to do with Intel and version 1 and dynamically linked, but nowhere does it say it's a directory. So I may not even understand what any of this means, but I at least know that it is a file and not a directory, which I could have also verified by typing in cd and then run this, which if I actually tried to tab repeatedly, it would not autocomplete because the computer is intelligent enough to understand you can only change directory into a directory and not a file. So if I wanted to actually run this as the challenge expects me to do, I would need to know a little bit around how to actually run a program. I believe the hint specifically for this asks you to understand how to run a program in a bash shell. For the purposes of this, I'm just going to explain it to you. When running a program in your terminal, if you know it's an executable file, which I know this to be because it's sort of highlighted in yellow, and it's one of those tells, it's not always the same from terminal to terminal or shell to shell. In this case, I know this with the context of having already solved the problem. So because it's highlighted, I know it's an executable file, which means I can run the program. It also has told me I can run the program. So if I want to run a program within my terminal, I add the characters dot and then a slash, and then the name of the file or the program that I'm trying to run. So that would be run. Again, if I hit tab, because the computer knows that this is a program that I can run, it is a file, it does autocomplete it. So when I hit enter, it actually prints something. It prints picoctf, and then in leet speak says get ready to reverse. And so if I copy and paste that, that's actually my flag that I need to solve that question. I need to leave this. Go back to challenge problems. Go back to where it said practice run 1. Zoom in and paste that answer. And if I hit submit, that'll be maybe one of the first questions where you're going to need to actually understand how to use a terminal or a shell to navigate through, like to actually get to the specific problem that they're asking you to solve, as well as actually running whatever it is relevant within the shell or the terminal. So that's a concrete example of why you want to know how to use a terminal or a shell. Does that help? Does anyone have any questions around Piazza, CanHack, picoctf, the terminal, anything at all? Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand, or you can even choose to ask me afterwards one-on-one or post on Piazza as well. Any questions sort of more publicly that you think anyone else can take advantage of as well? No?
All right, let's give it up for Hussein.
Awesome.